Good afternoon and welcome to KEI. We're always excited to see so many people show up, especially when it's in the middle of vacation time. And I know that you're giving up your vacations just to be here and to listen to our two presenters this afternoon. We are excited at KEI over the nature and the variety of the people that have come here to present academic papers, to give seminars, etc. Today is no exception. Two outstanding scholars, really interesting topic, a lot of parallels that will be drawn. And let me at this time introduce to you Nick Hemishevitz. Nick is in charge of our research here at KEI, and Nick will introduce the presenters and get the program going. Nick?
Thank you, Congressman Manzullo. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to the Korea Economic Institute of America. It's my pleasure to welcome you here all today for our event comparing Taiwan and South Korea's reconciliation efforts with China and North Korea. When looking at international relations in Asia, we often hear, especially right here in Washington, D.C., about the importance of good cross-strait relations as well as good inter-Korea relations. Yet just to get good relations between the respective pairings is often very difficult and politically sensitive, even if it's just an interaction between China and Taiwan or between North and South Korea. Moreover, as those interactions become more closely connected with the idea of potential unification, the issues get even more complex and emotional. Yet at various points, there have been opportunities, programs, and policies to help connect Taiwan and China and the Republic of Korea and the DPRK. Recently, the two Koreas have been struggling to return to operations at the Kaesong Industrial Complex. And with almost no interaction between the two Koreas, we thought this would be a good opportunity to look again to compare and contrast the various opportunities for positive interaction between Taiwan and China and North and South Korea, specifically because most of Taiwan and China's positive interaction has been along that economic realm. So we're excited to have with us today Dr. Ye-Chung Liu and Dr. Byung-Kwang Park to talk about these issues that we have before us. Dr. Ye-Chung Liu is an assistant professor of the Department of Diplomacy at National Chengchi University in Taipei, Taiwan. And Dr. Liu has also been an advisor to Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of National Defense, and the Mainland Affairs Council. Dr. Liu received his doctoral degree from George Washington University and his BA and MA from National Chengchi University. And Dr. Byung-Kwang Park is a senior research fellow of the Institute for National Security Strategy in Seoul, Korea. Prior to his current position, Dr. Park was a visiting research fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. He was also a postdoctoral fellow at Seoul National University and a visiting research fellow at the Institute for Oriental Culture at Tokyo University. And Dr. Park also helps advise the Korean Air Force and the National Unification Advisory Council. He has his PhD from Fudan University and a BA and MA from Dankook University. So today we have Dr. Liu. He'll give us the presentation of their thoughts, and for the question and answer portion, we'll have both Dr. Liu and Dr. Park here at the table to have a conversation with all of you about these issues. So please join me in welcoming Drs. Ye-Chung Liu and Byung-Kwang Park.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is really our honor to have this chance to be here to share our preliminary understanding about the cross-strait relations and inter-Korean relations and the tentative comparison with you. This seems to be a really serious topic for summer vacation, so I will keep my presentation short and looking forward to your comments and questions. So basically, the first question is why we decide to conduct the research on the cross-strait relations and inter-Korean relations. Okay, so here, as we can see, right now, for the time being, there are certain flashpoints in the Northeast Asia, and no doubt the cross-strait relations and inter-Korean relations are central to these flashpoints. And basically, as we can see, when there is a trend of the so-called globalization, there seems to be also some factors contributing to possible conflicts in the future. So the destabilizing factors, as we can see, one of them is the North Korean's nuclear crisis. The second one is territorial disputes in East Asia. And the third one is, in the future, maybe there will be certain kind of possible changes in China. But whether that could be a stabilizing factor or destabilizing factor, we still need to wait to see. So that's why we think this is a timely topic for us to explore, especially in terms of domestic factors. There are certain kind of leadership changes in the neighboring countries. We have presidential election in Taiwan in 2012, also in the United States in 2012. And then we have the transition in 2013, this year, with Madame Park assumed the office. So this is really a good time to see what would happen in the future. So first thing first, when it comes to rapprochement or reconciliation in international relations or in social sciences, there are certain kind of ideas that we can share with one another. The first one is the reconciliation is defined to describe the re-establishment of bilateral relations between two rivals after a conflict. As you can see, after 1949, and there were still certain kind of military conflicts across the Taiwan Strait. And in 1950, the Korean War. So it is really, this idea is really applicable to the cross-strait relations and inter-Korean relations. And then there are some scholars and analysts suggested that economic interdependence no doubt plays a significant role in lowering the hostilities between rivals. But whether that is always the case, still in question. And along with economic interdependence, many people suggest that it is not economic interdependence per se, but the problems and the will, political will, to solve those problems, to increase communications between two rivals, that is key to maintain peace in the region. But there are some other people, they are skeptical about this kind of suggestion. They argue that, for example, Germany, prior to the Second World War, still had great trade volume with other European countries, but World War II still happened. And also, there is a logical question. When we see that peace leading to trade, or trade leading to peace, the direction is still in question, because we always see these two factors coexist in the same time, but which one leads to the other, still in question. So, as trained social scientists, we are obliged to do some literature review before conducting our own research. Recently, there are at least three very good journal articles talking about the cross-strait and inter-Korean relations from these different perspectives. The first one by Miles Kyler and Scott Kastner, they argue that regime types matter and whether the so-called economic engagement policy could work depending heavily on how top leaders perceive this kind of tools. The second one by two Korean scholars, they argue that it is the so-called paradigm shift in a very boring IR theories, functionalism, realism, and constructivism that played a great role in shaping the inter-Korean relations as well as the cross-strait relations. To them, they argue that even though in the past we have functionalism at work, but in recent years, the so-called constructivism presiding identity, those identity factors as the most important one, seem to take root in cross-strait relations. So they were worried about that can be a destabilizing factor to the future of the cross-strait relations. The third one just came out this year by Steve Chen, Richard Hu, and Inju. They argue that it is always the so-called two-level games. Top leaders need to deal with international pressure and domestic pressure to proceed or to reach out the olive branch to the other side. So it is really important to have the perspective from the so-called two-level games. But in our research, we tend to argue that the so-called economic interdependence intertwined with communications and business-like negotiations between the two rivals, and then followed by the political will with support from domestic and international politics. That is the three basic components for sustainable peace in this region. So we try to create or to argue that there seems to be a virtuous cycle for stability. But here's a reminder. We would argue that these three conditions are all necessary for sustainable peace, but unfortunately, none of them would be the sufficient factor or sufficient condition that can single-handedly lead to peace across Taiwan Strait or in the inter-Korean relations. But having said that, we still see that economic interdependence as the most important one because it sets the foundation for the two rivals to cooperate. And then it can move on to, because there will be more and more people exchanges, more and more trade issues that need to be dealt with. So the two rivals would later on build up certain kind of institutions trying to reach out to talk over those issues with their counterparts on the other side. So there will be certain kind of communications or business-like negotiations going on. And then with the interactions within these communications, certain degree of mutual trust can be built up. And then this can lower the barrier for the top leaders on both sides to create, or at least try to create, a sustainable constituency within its border that can support to continue this kind of reach-out policy. And this kind of constituency comes not only from domestic politics. It is also important to have international support. So later on, we will talk about in details in the cross-strait and inter-Korean relations to demonstrate our argument. And then this part is also necessary to sustainable peace. Why? Because along with this political will, economic interdependence can continue afterwards. So we argue that virtuous cycle for stability needs to have all of them to continue. So in the case of cross-strait relations from 1987 to 2012, as we can see, the societal level interactions have contributed to gradually transform the cross-strait relations since late 1980s. And these interactions have two major components, trade and personal visits, as you can see. So figure 1 indicates the trade volume over the years from 1979 after the so-called opening up in mainland China. And then then it continues to 1987. Then after that, the cross-strait trade relations continue to increase over the few years, as you can see, until 2012. The number is always increasing, except the year 2009, because it is a reaction to the global financial crisis. And then, we can look up about the visits across the Taiwan Strait. As you can see, the red line indicates how many visits from Taiwan to China, and the green line indicates how many visits from China to Taiwan. As you can see, the number also increases over the years. And with trade and more people-to-people interactions, there emerged the needs for cooperation. That's why the Taiwanese government set up the SEF, Strait Exchange Foundation, in the year 1991, March 1991. And later on in the same year, the mainland China also established the Association for Relations Across the Taiwan Strait, ARETS. And they began to conduct several rounds of negotiations across the Taiwan Strait, including the very famous 1993 Guwang talk in Singapore. And then that kind of talks, high-level official talks, continued over the years until 1999. After President Lee Teng-hui of Taiwan declared the so-called special state-to-state theory, mainland China unilaterally decided to suspend the continuation of any kind of talks under this SEF ARETS framework. But until 2008, when President Ma Ying-jeou assumed the office, he restored this kind of talks across the Taiwan Strait. So right now, to date, there are 70 rounds of meetings conducted by the heads and high-level officials of SEF and ARETS from 1991 to July 2013. And as you can see, to proceed this kind of negotiations, Taiwan and mainland China actually reached certain kind of consensus. For example, the 1992 consensus, although it's only a verbal description, but if we compare that achievement with what we have in inter-Korean relations, they have formal agreements between the two Koreas. But across the Taiwan Strait, it is informal 1992 consensus that tried very hard to keep the interactions across the Taiwan Strait. Then it comes to the political will. And here we try to distinguish the so-called basic constituencies for top leaders to continue their reach out to the rivals. The most important group to top leaders are the so-called DOFs, who are favorable to stability across the Taiwan Strait. And these DOFs comes not only from domestic, but also from international. So that is why in the past few years, part of the reason why they enjoy stability across the Taiwan Strait, I would say the United States played a very significant role in ensuring this track to happen. And if the top leaders, they feel insecure to reach out to their counterparts, what would happen? As we can see, mainland China began to reach out to Taiwan in the late 1970s and 80s, but turned to a hawkish policy under Jiang Zemin in 1995 to 1996. I think we don't need to remind everyone in this room what really happened during that period of time, but it is really very dangerous in that period in terms of the cross-strait relations. And also on the Taiwan side, the mainland China policy under Lee Teng-hui and especially for his two-state theory in 1992 and under Chen Shui-bian for his one country on each side statement since 2002. They have their own political concerns. We are not here to judge whether it is right or wrong, but I would say that basically those top leaders, what they care about is their political survival in domestic politics. So that is why they choose not to nurture more and more doves within their borders, but instead maybe they think it is more good for themselves to attract more hawks by conducting a relatively hawkish policy toward their rivals. And also, after 2008, as I suggested, there were certain kind of progress across the Taiwan Strait. And China, in return, also showed reciprocal restraint to decline Taiwan's diplomatic allies' quest for official recognition for the past few years. And this is a figure indicating how Taiwanese people perceive China's hostility toward Taiwanese government as well as Taiwanese people. As indicated here, these perceptions go ups and downs, but it is highly related to how China conduct its policy toward Taiwan on certain issue areas. For example, international participation. That is one of those keys sensitive to Taiwanese people. Having said that, a caveat here is that even though reconciliation does not always come no cost, some people are skeptical of China's growing economic and political clout over Taiwan, in the sense that Taiwan's economy is being hollowed out, while international participation basically is depending on China's unilateral goodwill. So for that, any prudent political leaders in Taiwan and also in mainland China need to pay attention to this, because if this trend continue to grow, then what is possibly to happen is the dose can be expanded, but in the meantime, the hoax can be expanded too. So how would that factor in the future cross-strait relations? We need to pay attention to it. Then it comes to the inter-Korean relations. As I said earlier, it is very interesting to keep in mind that the inter-Korean relations are actually conducted based upon several agreements between two Koreas. Even though they have this kind of agreements are not necessarily a guarantee to sustainable peace. And they reached the agreement in the first one in the 1992, but in the following 2 years, as you can see, North Korea adopted a very hawkish policy toward not only South Korea, but also the outside world, the international partners in that area. And in late 1990s, there seemed to be a window of opportunity for President Kim Dae-jung to deliver an olive branch to the North under the name of Sunshine Policy. Why? Because at that time, after 1994, the agreed framework to deal with North Korea nuclear crisis seemed to be effective at that time. So that gave the opportunity to President Kim to reach out to the North. So as we can see, the dose comes not only from South Korean domestic politics, but also from the United States for that time. And in terms of trade volume, the inter-Korean trade since 1989 and this trend began in the early 1990s. The trend continued to grow, but please be reminded that the total volume is still considered very low. For example, the peak in terms of trade volume happened in 2012. The pure number of this trade volume is roughly equivalent to what Taiwan and mainland China had in 1990. Okay, so there, in purely numerical terms, there seem to be at least 20 years lag between the cross-strait relations, trade relations, as opposed to what we have in the inter-Korean relations. And also, in terms of the numbers of visitors from South Korea to North Korea, as we can see, the peak comes out here in the year 2008. But also, please be reminded that the number here is roughly equivalent to what we have across the Taiwan Strait in the year 1988. Okay, so another 20 years. Okay, so in terms of political will, I would say the political leaders in South Korea actually demonstrated more and stronger political will than their counterparts in Taiwan in terms of reaching out to their rivals. And President Kim Dae-jung meet with another Kim in North Korea in the year 2000. And then later on, President Roh Moo-hyun met his counterpart from North Korea in the year 2007. Okay, and so this kind of high-level summit meeting may be perceived from the top leaders' perspective, may be helpful to sustain their political assets in the domestic field, but it is not always necessarily good to their international allies. For example, the US policy toward North Korea actually also played out in the whole process. After the year 2002, actually the United States adopted a relatively hawkish and being relatively sensitive to North Korea. And after that, it put a really difficult position for the leaders in South Korea, whoever wants to reach out to the North. So after 2007, even Roh Moo-hyun decided to reach out to the North with the provision of certain kind of economic and humanitarian aid. His policy still perceived as a failure in South Korea. Okay, so low intensity of trade relationship and thus economic dependence together with North's truculent behavior made it very difficult for both sides to build trust over time. And also, societal integration might be difficult to business-like negotiations resulted from people-to-people exchanges and makes it even more difficult for South to reach out to the North. So, lack of reliable doors domestically and internationally are the key factors that make the South hesitate to reach out to the North, especially after the year 2008. So right now, the question becomes, what would happen when Madame Park assumed the office? Is there anything could be changed in the future? So we can leave that part to Dr. Park later. But here, we would like to address some lessons learned from this comparison of cross-strait and inter-Korean relations. As we have argued, we would continue to argue that a virtuous cycle is needed to preserve stability. But from this figure, as we can see, in terms of cross-strait relations, economic interdependence, we can check this as a yes, right? And communications across the Taiwan Strait, yes. And political will with support from domestic and international audience. For the past few years, yes, but whether in the future that could still be the case, we need to ask that later. But in terms of inter-Korean relations, this is very low. And here, the communications across the border between two Koreas seem to be very difficult. As we can be reminded just last week, when both sides, North Korea and South Korea, they began to have the negotiation over the Kaesong industry district. What happened? There was a severe conflict between two sides. Okay, but political will here, if we apply this to Madame Park, maybe there seems to be a political will with Madame Park to reach out to the North, but that kind of political will is not unconditionally. So there would be certain kind of preservations within the Park's administration right now. Oops. Okay, the computer wants a vacation. So here, from the experience of the cross-strait relations, we would try to remind that the South Korea may be better to adopt a step-by-step strategy toward the North, building trust in a gradual way. And also, what Taiwan can learn from the inter-Korean relations. Personally, I think that is very important. That is, if there is no strong or solid foundation for high level, especially the summit meeting between top leaders across the Taiwan Strait, that would be very dangerous for both sides to meet without any prior preparedness. Okay, so I'll stop here, and all comments and questions are welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. So now we'll take your questions. We have some microphones, so please raise your hand and we'll get to you. Please state your name and organization and have a question. And I think, yes, Mike Ponte over here.
Thanks. I'm Mike Ponte. I'm the director of the Washington office for the Democratic Progressive Party of Taiwan. Dr. Liu, thanks very much for your presentation. I have a question, though, about hawks and doves. I think it's hard to find too many doves on the Chinese side in this equation, and hard actually to find too many hawks on the Taiwan side. And I think the question is, you noted that in Jiang Zemin period 95, 96, there was a tension period there. Mm-hmm. And of course the tension was because Taiwan was having a democratic election, right? Mm-hmm. And the Chinese were not happy about that. Mm-hmm. So it seems to me that the equation is not so much whether there's going to be reconciliation across the straits or good relations, but whether the Taiwan side is willing to accept the Chinese preconditions, right? And the whole so-called One China framework that they're trying to push. President Ma has been willing to live under that. President Lee and President Chen were not so happy to do that. So I think there's a bit of a complication in your analysis of making it hawks and doves. Mm-hmm. President Chen, when he became president, talked about a possible future One China. He talked about a possible confederation. He tried to lay out a lot of olive branches for the other side, but it didn't work because the other side wanted to hear a different political context. So I think that's where I see a difference in the two situations. In Korea, my understanding anyhow, Koreans on both sides accept that there's one Korea, really, and ultimately unification is absolutely the goal. That's not so true on the Taiwan side. And I think that's a major difference in the analysis as I see it. And I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Okay, thanks.
Dr. Liu, if you want to respond.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. A very good friend of mine back in more than 10 years, right? Okay. Yes, I think I agree with you. And in terms of hawks and doves, in our analysis, basically we put this kind of groups against the idea of, in relation to the idea of stability. So it is not purely the domestic part. It includes the international factors. And also, I agree with you that during the 1990s, when we perceived that the tension between Taiwan and mainland China, and also I would like to join you and elaborate that for China, there seems to be only one final outcome, that is unification. And whether it's debatable or negotiable is whether it is by force or by negotiations. But my personal, relatively shallow understanding is that in Taiwan, maybe we would like to have, maybe unification is still one of the options, even though the majority of people in Taiwan, less and less of them, see that as a attractive option. But the other option to most of Taiwanese people is to maintain the status quo. So we have status quo unification as at least the two options, and Taiwan independence maybe also the other option. So at least there's three options for Taiwanese people. But for China, it seems to me that unification is the only solution. So that can create certain kind of problems. So that's why we try to distinguish hawks and doves based upon their understanding or interpretation about stability in that region. Thanks.
Okay. Yes, question over here.
Thank you. Akira Chiba from the Japanese Embassy. As a follow-up to the previous question, the analysis of hawks and doves is very, very interesting and useful. I'd like to know if you can apply that to North Korea, because we can only imagine what goes on in North Korea. And my imagination was that whatever the leader says, everyone will follow. Or do you sense any factional politics that even the dear leader has to be mindful of?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I don't clear about your asking please.
If you
有没有在北韩里面有没有任何鸽派？
北韩里面。
So, are there doves and hawks in North Korea too? Or does the leader decide everything?
Frankly speaking, I don't have information about that, but I think in North Korea they have, generally speaking, North Korea is very strictly dominated by Kim Jong-un. So, generally speaking, the Korean scholars thought that there is no other diverse factions. Only Kim Jong-un dominated North Korea wholly. So maybe you are very disappointed about my response, but we believe that there is only one person ruled whole North Korea.
Yes, may I? Yes, thank you for the question. I think this is a very good question. And basically, in our paper, we somehow left that part out because that would be a big project to distinguish who are the doves and hawks within China as well as in North Korea. So we focus on the unilateral efforts conducted by Taiwan and South Korea. But I totally agree with you because from this analysis, even though we didn't go into details in our paper, but we kind of sensed that right now, in terms of an authoritarian regime, China is relatively loosening up in the past few years. So that would be more possible for the Chinese part to forge a dove as a constituency that can support stability across the Taiwan Strait. But considering North Korea, as we have discussed, since the year 1950 throughout 2012, how many leaders in North Korea? Only 3, right? So there is they do not need any constituencies that can sustain their policy, right? So that would be very difficult for South Korea to adopt economic interdependence or people-to-people exchange to forge a formidable or a sustainable constituency within North Korea. Thank you.
Yeah, according to my personal research, that after the Korean War in China changed to 10 leaders, and Korea also changed to 10 leaders, but in North Korea only 3 leaders.
We'll go to Dennis Halpin, and we'll go in the back first.
HK Seo from the National Association of Korean Americans. You talked about the rapprochement as a condition for reconciliation process. We've seen rapprochement in Asia between U.S. and China after the Korean War, and U.S. and Vietnam, and also inter-Korean rapprochement. But I think the 2 factors that are missing in this equation is Japan and North Korea, and U.S. and North Korea. So what do you see as the prospects for these 2 components ever happening?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks for the question. Yes, that would be we try to categorize that part as the so-called international support. But because of the limitation of the paper, we cannot elaborate on it at this moment. But we got the sense that Japan and the United States, the so-called third party, really played an important role in forging, or at least to support, or at least do not oppose South Korea's reach out to the North. That would be a necessary condition for South Korea to continue any kind of conciliatory posture toward the North. So the question becomes whether Japan and the United States would accept North Korea if North Korea continues to conduct nuclear missile tests, something like that. So that would be very difficult. So basically, we would argue that the roots of the problem still rests in North Korea side.
I'm Dennis Halpin from U.S. Korea Institute. Since we're talking about Taiwan and South Korea, there's been just informal speculation. Going back to the Top Cut Soda agreement for a second, I mean, Americans might know that, not know what that is, but every Korean that I ever met knew what it was. Basically, the Russo-Japanese War, the Japanese had sunk the Russian fleet at Tsushima. President Teddy Roosevelt was called in. He negotiated the Portsmouth Treaty and won the Nobel Peace Prize. During that summer of 1905, he sent his Secretary of War, not State, Taft, because at that point, Taft and Roosevelt were good friends. Taft was his successor. Later, they became political rivals, as you know. But Taft went and met Count Katsura in Tokyo. The United States in 1898 had become a Pacific power, taken over the Philippines. The Spanish had left, but some Filipinos didn't think that was a great idea, so there had been some unrest in the Philippines by those who wanted independence. So the U.S. wanted assurances about the Philippines. Japan, I mean, Russia was done in Asia when its fleets sank. Japan was preparing to take a bigger role in Manchuria and discussing their protectorate in Korea. So in the 20s, this informal memorandum was found of a conversation. Some people say it was a gentleman's agreement. Some people say it was a discussion. But the Count Katsura said, you know, Japan has intentions for a protectorate in Korea. We're going to stay out of the Philippines, which they did till December 1941. So the question now, when Xi Jinping has met President Obama in Sunnydale and President Park has gone to Beijing, and there's all this euphoria in South Korea, promises of, oh, China's really going to help now with North Korea. But there's some speculation the Chinese always play Chinese chess. What are they going to get? If Beijing decides to give concessions or to assist South Korea and the United States in trying to negotiate the North Korea problem, are they going to then expect concessions on Taiwan? Could there be another gentleman's agreement, but this time not dealing with Korea and the Philippines, but instead with Taiwan and Korea?
Yes, thank you for your questions. Actually, I think that Madam Park's visiting China was very successful. But as you mentioned, that actually let you know that China asking Korean government that we need to cooperation with with South Korea when we cope with the China-Japan relationship, especially on the Senkaku Island. But Madam Park rejected about China's proposal because our government thinks that the stability on the not even the stability on the Korean Peninsula, but also the stability of the Northeast Asian region is very important. So we don't want to see we don't want to intervene the China-Japan very delicate relationship. So and then China's North Korean policy Personally, I think that China's North Korean policies the most important thing is China really wants to resolve the North Korean nuclear issues, or China really wants to see the North Korean regime's stability. So if China really wants to the nuclear issues, resolve North Korea nuclear issues, then China really should push up to North Korea. But personally, I think that China doesn't really want to resolve the North Korean nuclear issues. So usually China wants to North Korean regime's stability. So when Madam Park visiting China, actually we asking Chinese government that changing Chinese attitude toward North Korea. But China also explained that North Korea is a strategic asset to China. So their changing attitude is a little bit tactical change, but it's not a strategic change. Yes, I think so.
Well, go ahead and right in the middle here.
Hello, my name is Iris Shaw. I'm from the DPP U.S. Mission Office. My question is towards the virtuous cycle for stability that you propose. Can you please give me more case studies or concrete examples from this model that you just presented? Based on my limited understanding for Taiwan's situation, the cross-strait situation, the economic independence are definitely very high right now across the strait. And when it comes to the business-like negotiations, what we could see recently from the news is like more civil protests, civil unrest against and also the doubt of the negotiation process of the cross-strait services agreements, and that comes from the bipartisan groups, civil groups, and I don't think that's part of the hawkish approach, as you put it. And also, when it leads to the political will, does it mean? I got the impression that you're saying it's from the top leadership, but then my question would be like, what is the democratic procedures in this model if it's like a strong political will like Germany during the war? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the question. I think there are at least two parts in your question. The first one is any other cases that can sustain this kind of virtuous cycle. I think that would be very important if we look into history. And recently there was a scholar from Georgetown. He published a book. It is about how to turn rivals into friends. And he draws lots of cases within it. But I would say there is something missing in his equation. That is because in the whole book, he emphasizes how important the political will is to play out all the consequences, positive consequences, moving toward the so-called security community as proposed by Karl Deutsch in late 1950s to describe the U.S. and Canada relationship. But to me, I would say inter-Korean relations and cross-strait relations, these two cases are, they share some similarities, but also they have their own uniqueness. So we try to draw this virtuous cycle. That is because we want to see what kind of the whole procedure and the preconditions for sustainable peace. And I totally agree with you to your second part. I think Taiwan right now is a full-fledged democracy. So civil society is really an integral part to Taiwan, and it is really important. And in terms of political will, in the case of Taiwan, I would argue that because there are many elections, so that is a way to for the people or the constituencies to express their thinking about public policy to the top leaders. And for the top leaders, I would say it is not easy for one single man trying to single-handedly manage the cross-strait relations. He needs, or she in the future needs to adopt a very broad general consensus from Taiwan society. So that is a paramount task for any leaders in Taiwan. Yeah, and also get back to the question Dr. Park just answered. I may have one thing to add about Taiwan and U.S.-China relations and what role Taiwan is in this so-called G2 relationship. I would say many people in Taiwan are worried about the possibility that there would be a so-called fourth communique between China and the United States. Even though in any form, even though it's a gentleman agreement or something like that. So for Taiwan, my perspective is when we try to pursue a relatively stable relationship with mainland China, in the meantime, we're still trying to have international participation as much as possible. That is not necessarily leading to Taiwan independence, but it is really a necessary condition for Taiwan to continue this virtuous cycle with mainland China in terms of sustainable stability. So we have ECFA with mainland China, and then in the meantime, we are trying to pursue a working relationship with other countries, maybe in the future, the RCEP or the TPP. Thank you.
Question right here in front.
My name is Daniel Moon. I'm from the Mansfield Foundation. I very much appreciate the fact that Dr. Liu presented the point that when it comes to inter-Korea relations, social and economic exchanges done through mid-level government talks is the foundation for a stable inter-Korea relations. But what was also mentioned on the floor was the fact that when it comes to North Korea, due to the very structural, institutional nature of the government of North Korea, Kim Jong-un is the sole voice when it comes to formulating North Korea's foreign policy. What we've also learned in the past decade or so is that social exchanges conducted between the two Koreas, including the family exchanges, as well as the tours to the Kumgang Mountains, weren't that successful in actually creating, a stable, lasting, peaceful Korean relationship, as exemplified the nuclear experiments, nuclear tests, right following the successful exchanges. So then my question becomes, how do we get over this legacy of unsuccessful social economic exchanges? How do we go about creating an institutionalized channel of mid-level talks between the two Koreas?
Okay, thank you very much.
Dr. Liu or Dr. Kumar?
Okay. Should I go first? Okay. Thank you for the question. It is really important, and I would say this is very similar to what we had for the summit meetings between King and King and Ru and King in 2000 and 2007. Why I argue that? That is because when you have certain kind of institutions, the positive side is you can both sides can try to negotiate or to solve disputes. But on the other hand, then that would be very indicative. If any negotiations or talks over the Kansong Mountain Industry Park failed, then that would be probably a disaster to South Korea, because the general public would have the image that, okay, right now we are a democracy, but this government is not good at handling relationship with North Korea. So that would be the negative side to institutionalize under these circumstances. So my personal perspective is that for the time being, I think Madam Park, Dr. Park can sure add to this. Madam Park is trying to somehow slow down the process. So I would predict that in the future, South Korea's North policy would be very different from Lee Myung-bak, that's for sure. But that will not be similar or identical to what Roh Moo-hyung government had in the past. So I would say it's more like a modeling through process.
Okay, thank you for your question. Dr. Liu explained very precisely, and I think I'd like to say that we can consider about the inter-Korean relations. Then we need to we should know precisely understand about the North Korea's real intentions, because North Korea sometimes insists to dialogue with South Korea. However, in other side, North Korea developed their nuclear weapons. So sometimes when we dialogue with, or when we keep going with North Korean relationship, then we should understand precisely North Korea's real intentions. And another point is that we should observe principles and standards, because sometimes our Korean government showed a very bad case. For example, North Korea threat South Korea, then we rewarded North Korea. So repeated bad case. So I think the first thing is that we need to precisely know the North Korea's real intention. And another point is that we need to observe principle and standard. Yeah.
Can I just follow up, Dr. Park, on this question? Because even if, I mean, the question is kind of like getting over these historical legacies, or getting over these legacies of unsuccessful opportunities. So South Korea could go back to Kumgansan, or could, Kaesong could start again. It's just a matter of principles. But for the Park Geun-hye administration, it's a matter of principles, right? Or they're arguing for a matter of principles. But is there is there any? Are those two places, Kaesong and Kumgansan, the first places to start? Or if you get principles on Kaesong, could you go somewhere else or start doing other sort of projects? Or do you have to or do you think that there's an order of Kaesong, Kumgansan, and then everything else?
Actually, I mentioned about the principle and standard, that because, for example, on the Kumgang Mountain case and Kaesong Industry case is same to South Korean government, because, for example, on the Kaesong Mountain case, why we stopped to tourists to go there? Because, as you know, the 2008 outbreak, one of our tourists killed by North Korean soldiers in Kumgang Mountain. And then after that, South Korean government asking North Korea to apologize and inspections. But North Korea didn't accept our asking. And then about the Kaesong Industry complex is that now we can talking about the Kaesong Industry issues, but in the meeting, South Korean government also asking to North Korea about we need to guarantee, North Korea's guarantee that North Korea will not one-sidedly stop the Kaesong Industry complex, because the principle and standard is same as to now the South Korean government. If North Korea doesn't accept our principle or standard, then we cannot come back to Kaesong Mountain and Kaesong Industry.
Okay. Question in the back, and then we'll go to this side.
Hi, my name is Walter Wu from the United States Military Academy. I had a question about the cycle for stability, and you talked about how it leads to stability and peace. But how do you see that peace, say we do reach that cycle with the Koreas, how do you see that peace translating into unification, as that is kind of the main goal here for Korea? And so I guess maybe kind of explain that process, or if you see that as a realistic goal for the Koreas.
As you know, the South Korea always insist the peaceful reunification, and North Korea also always insists the peaceful reunification. So, if we want to reach, or if we want to achieve the reunification, then the most important precondition is the stability on the Korean Peninsula. But now the situation is very dangerous and serious, because, as you know, the North Korea developed nuclear weapons. So now the Korean Peninsula situation is not so peaceful. So South Korean government to asking North Korea to stop the developing nuclear weapons, and we need to dialogue with North Korea.
So it seems like in the cycle of, that virtuous cycle you're talking about, is there, that's just kind of interaction between North and South Korea, or between Taiwan and China. But is there another? Do you need to add another? Is there another? Does something need to be added in order to get to that final talk about unification, or do you think you can still develop toward unification by just using interactions within those three pillars of the cycle?
Well, of course, I'm not on behalf of South Korean government, but personally, I think that our last goal is unification. But as I mentioned, before we reach the unification, the peaceful situation or peaceful environment is very important precondition. So when we talking with North Korea, when we proceeding the dialogue with North Korea, after all, at first we want to solve the problem what we faced with. For example, the Kaesong Mountain, the Kumgang Mountain Kaesong industry and nuclear issues and so on. If we cannot solve that kind of problem, then the reunification is not accomplished, I think, because last week I have been to China to participate the seminar. The title was on the 60 years of armistice in Korean Peninsula. So Chinese friends said that in Korean Peninsula, the nuclear issue is the hostage of the peace treaty or peace situation in Korean Peninsula. But I don't think so, because if we cannot solve the nuclear issues, then we can accomplish the real peaceful situation in Korean Peninsula. Same as the Korean reunification is same. If we cannot resolve the North Korean nuclear issues, then we cannot reach the real reunification.
Yes, and in the case of the cross-strait relations, I would add, for the so-called virtuous cycle we developed right now, that is mainly focusing on how to sustain stability. So if we are going to transform it to something like unification in the future across the Taiwan Strait, I would add many things. One of them is the economic development and the level of living standard in China. I think maybe also in Chinese top leadership, right now they have several priorities in terms of domestic issues that can prevail dealing with this Taiwan issue. So I would say maybe for the time being, it is still kind of premature to predict future unification from this cycle.
Question right here in the front.
Paul Walcott, University of Maryland. It seems to me there's been not enough differentiation made between the Chinese and the Korean situation, although one of the important points was just touched upon, that is the living standards are coming up very rapidly in China, and they're beginning to approach Taiwan, and one can foresee a rather interesting reunification there. It's maybe unlikely, but the Chinese now have with Hong Kong, one country, two systems. You can imagine one country, three systems. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that the Korean situation is just utterly different. That is, as far as one can tell, the changes in the standard of living are getting, the differences are getting bigger and bigger. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine one country, two systems. If you're going to say there's going to be unification, hypothetically, in the next 30 years, how might it occur? It seems to me the most obvious way is if there's a collapse of the North Korean situation, and that might be very messy, and one can understand why the Chinese would be very concerned about that because, well, for all sorts of obvious reasons. Incidentally, one of the questions I'd like to raise is the United States' role in this. The Chinese, if they look at the Korean War, or they look at what happened in Eastern Europe, might be very concerned that if there were reunification, American troops would end up in North Korea. And it seems to me that from an American point of view, we have absolutely no interest in doing that. We should have no interest in doing that. Would it be helpful for us to make a commitment not to, if there were reunification, not to send troops into North Korea? Would the Chinese welcome such a commitment by the United States, or would they just say, let's not hint that the North Korean system may collapse?
Mm-hmm.
But again, it seems to me that the two situations, the Korean situation and the Chinese situation, are just so utterly different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think I agree with you. In terms of the domestic situations, China and North Korea are very different. And the role the United States can play, I would say, in the cross-strait relations, maybe the United States, for the time being, should be or can play as a guarantor to stability across the Taiwan Strait. From my perspective, I would say the Taiwanese government tried a lot trying to maintain the status quo. And with the U.S. support on this, that would be easier for the top leaders in Taiwan, no matter who that would be in the future, have an easier job managing the cross-strait relations. And in terms of the inter-Korean relations, my tentative observation is that the U.S. Maybe needs to have more coordination with South Korea when the South is trying to reach out to the North. So maybe certain kind of coordination and transparency would be required for the future of the inter-Korean relations. And also about the U.S. military presence in the Korean Peninsula. Yes, I agree with you that China has been always worried about that. But I think it's still depending on how would the Korean Peninsula be unified in the future. If it is purely the collapse of the north part, then the question becomes how the South can handle with that, or any options for the South to handle with that. And in that case, maybe the U.S. can play a relatively neutral role on this and just let the South to take the lead. Maybe that's one of the solutions.
Thank you for your questions. I think it's very interesting and important issues to the South Korean people. I think I already mentioned that South Korea wants to come through peaceful reunification in the Korean Peninsula. However, also we have to consider about the non-peaceful reunification. For example, as you mentioned, we should prepare for the North Koreans' collapse or contingency. So, in that case, as he mentioned, that we need to very high level or very concrete coordination with USA. But in other side, we need to consider about the China's attitude and influence over North Korea. At first, if we talking about the North Korean collapse or non-peaceful reunification, then the concept of collapse or concept of contingency in North Korea, South Korean USA, we have a same concept or not. I think that's the starting point. And then how to intervene on the North Korea when North Korea breakout collapse. And how do we cope with China's intervention to North Korean collapse, or how do we cope with China's influence of North Korea? That is very important things to South Korea and USA. And then my Chinese friend said that if breakout collapse in North Korea, and then after that only South Korea across the Sanpashin?
38
DMZ. Then Chinese can accept that, maybe. But USA Army maybe across the DMZ go into the North Korea, then Chinese Army will not accept that. So actually our government, our institute have insisted that we need to dialogue with Chinese about the North Korean collapse situation. And furthermore, actually we need that South Korea, China, USA trilateral dialogue about that issue. Yeah.
A couple more questions right up here in the front, and we'll work our way back.
Thank you. This is Xiran Qi with Crow Advisory Solutions. I have a question for Dr. Liu about the bureaucracy within Taiwanese government. Who has the bigger voice in mapping out the policy and strategy in the reconciliation efforts with China within the Taiwanese government? The President, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or the Ministry of Mainland Affairs? How do they work together, and how do you see the political will of President Ma to reconcile in his second terms? Thank you.
Okay, in terms of this bureaucratic framework, according to the Constitution, I would say the President has the only authority is the only one who has the authority to conduct mainland China policy, along with the cooperation and coordination from the MAC, the Mainland Affairs Council, as well as the MOFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also there are some other ministries in Taiwan involved. For example, economic affairs, for example, education and agriculture, those kind of things. So it is really a big chunk of, in terms of bureaucratic framework behind this Taiwan's mainland China policy. So in terms of political will, I would say my understanding is that President Ma maybe has something in mind, but actually Taiwan is a democracy, so everything needs to go through a democratic process. So that is why also the Legislative Yuan has a big say on these things. Let me share one story with you. In January, I was in Beijing, and I met some people related, maybe somehow in charge of its Taiwan policy. And they told me that many Taiwanese people visiting Beijing suggesting that they are representing the Legislative Yuan. They said that some legislator asked me to do this and that. Yeah, it's amazing. So but it is also it is natural because Taiwan is a democracy. So you can see so many different voices within a democratic society. Yes.
Okay, and then a question here, and then we'll go in the back. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Sabrina with Project 2049. Thank you both so much for coming out on this summer afternoon. My question is on the virtuous cycle for stability. Is there a mechanism that you can share with us of how you envision the cycle to deal with more political issues, both on the Korean Peninsula and also in the cross-strait relations? Because obviously there are, I think, big elephants in the room
yes.
when two parties come and gather. And can you just elaborate on your synopsis of that, please?
Okay, thanks.
I think in terms of that virtuous cycle that we have across the Taiwan Strait for the time being, I would say it is an approach indicating a so-called bottom-up process. Okay, so we have economic interdependence first, then we have people-to-people exchanges, then it occurred some needs to deal with daily routines, for example, transporter crimes across the Taiwan Strait. And then it required the government to do something to make sure that everything is on the correct course. Okay, personally, I would say I would expect that the growth in terms of exchanges across the Taiwan Strait should be focusing on economic, cultural, and all those positive things, but definitely not on crimes. You know, there are some criminals from Taiwan. They just fled to mainland China to escape from any accusations, criminal accusations, something like that. Most of them are committing like frauds in Taiwan, so it's a big problem. So this kind of daily routines, it comes from people's needs, and then it requires the government to do something. This can help the top leaders to reach out to their previous rivals, that's for sure. But whether it can automatically leading to the so-called political negotiations, personally, I would somehow doubt that. And especially from what we have learned from the inter-Korean relations, I would say inter-Korean relations seem to adopt a very different approach. It's more like top-down. Okay, top leaders, they meet and the ministerial level meetings, but somehow those honeymoon was so short, you know, and then that kind of outcome backfired the top leaders in South Korea. So I think for the time being, maybe in the case of Taiwan, it is still premature to predict that both sides, especially on the government level, would touch upon political issues anytime soon. Thank you.
Frankly speaking, I'm not so theory-oriented person because I got a PhD in China and now I'm working at the Policy Institute. But if we compared with Taiwan Strait relationship and inter-Korean relationship, then maybe we can find that very interesting things. That is to say, the cross-strait relationship is based on the principle of economy first and politics later. However, this principle is difficult to apply for inter-Korean relationship. Regarding to the Korean case, the political interactions induced economic interaction. Mm-hmm. So that's very interesting differences.
And last question in the back.
Yeah, Dave Fitzgerald, retired Foreign Service. I think my question was probably answered by Mr. Park, but I was struck very much by the real start of the cycle, or the virtuous cycle, is a sense of real economic interaction and a recognition in both China and in Taiwan of the economic advantages of that. We don't see that at all in the 20 years or less of exchange between South Korea and North Korea. It seems to be entirely a political theater, a kind of imposition by the South Korea, the giving of money to North Korea for some economic enterprises that are really not having any kind of real recognition in the North of any sense of dependence. So in terms of this virtuous cycle that's been proposed, it seems to be working with Taiwan, China. We're stuck in the first step with Korea.
Okay, thank you. I think we have failed political engagement and economic interaction lead to peace and trust in Korean Peninsula. Maybe you know that during the Kim Dae-jung and Nomu현 government period, we have positively engaged in North Korea but during that period, North Korea developed nuclear weapons. So, and now South Korea faced with very serious security problems. So, I think that if we consider about the Korean Peninsula case, then the economic interaction not must to induce a political trust or political peace condition.
Great. Well, thank you. This has been a great discussion. Thank you all for coming and for raising these great points. Please join me in thanking Dr. Liu and Dr. Park.